You know, some stories start so completely normal. A routine school morning, kids in the yard, but then a devastating accident. What looks like one driver's fatal mistake, well, it turns out to be just the last link in a long chain of failures. Today, we're going to break down how a tragedy involving a school meal program ended up putting an entire system on trial. So, picture the scene. It's December 11th, 2025. Students at a school in Jakarta are just outside, reading. One of those students is Amar. For him, the day started with books, with his friends, and it ended in absolute chaos. This is his own account of that moment when everything just shattered. To really understand the how of all this, we first have to reconstruct the when. So let's break down the exact timeline of that absolutely terrible morning. Okay, so at 6:38 a.m., it's a picture of calm, right? Students are reading in neat rows. Exactly 1 hour later, a delivery van for the National Free Meal Program, the MBG, arrives. But instead of stopping, it just surges up this incline, completely demolishes the fence, and plows right into the children. In just a matter of seconds, a routine delivery became an absolute nightmare. 22. Just let that number sink in for a second. That's the staggering human cost of those few terrible seconds. 22 students and a teacher, all of them just caught in the path of this out-of-control vehicle. Every single one of them, a life changed forever by a system that was supposed to help them, not hurt them. An event this catastrophic is never, ever just one person's fault. It's more like a chain of causes, one link leading to the next. To really understand it, we have to start with that very first link, the person who was behind the wheel. The driver was a 34-year-old man identified as AI. But honestly, the most critical detail here isn't his age or his name. It's this. He was a sopir pengganti, a substitute, just filling in because the regular driver called in sick. And that one fact, that is the very first sign that this tragedy goes so much deeper than simple driver error. So what was going through his head? According to his own testimony to the police, his error unfolded in 3 quick steps. First, he's trying to get the van up this tricky uphill entrance to the school. Second, he starts to panic. He thinks the brakes are failing. And third, in that moment of pure high-stress panic, he makes the fatal error. He slammed his foot on the accelerator thinking it was the brake. And this, right here, presents the central conflict of the whole initial investigation. On one side, you have the driver claiming the vehicle was faulty, that the brakes felt weak or kurang pakem, as they say. But on the other side, he flat out admits to clear human error. So which was it? Was it the man or was it the machine? The answer to that question, well, it leads us right up the chain of command. See, this is way bigger than one driver and one van. We need to zoom out to see the whole system that really set the stage for this tragedy. A system where one simple accident rips the curtain back on a deep-rooted chain of negligence. So the driver and the van, they weren't actually managed by the government. They were operated by what's called a yayasan, which is an Indonesian foundation. In this specific case, it was a third-party contractor, the Yayasan Darul Esti Sumida, that was hired to handle all the logistics. And that right there introduces a critical layer of separation and a whole lot of risk. And this is exactly where the system just begins to completely break down. The Yayasan put a substitute driver on the road, which immediately raises questions about their vetting process, their training, everything. Then, if the driver's claim about the brakes is even possibly true, that points to a massive failure in vehicle maintenance. And maybe most critically, they completely failed to assess the obvious risk of sending a big van up a steep hill straight into a yard packed with kids. So who hired this contractor in the first place? Well, that responsibility falls to the Badan Gizi Nasional, or the BGN. This is the national government agency with the ultimate oversight for the entire meal program. The buck, at least in theory, is supposed to stop right here. Recognizing this responsibility, the BGN and the local government, they acted fast. They immediately announced they would cover 100% of the medical costs for every single victim. And this was a crucial move. It was basically a public admission that, hey, even if we didn't drive the van, the failure of our contractor was ultimately our failure too. So now let's bring our focus back to the real cost of all these failures, the devastating impact on the victims, and the really complex path to finding any kind of accountability. This number, it's just almost impossible to wrap your head around. It's the number of teeth that an 11-year-old boy, Mohammed Prilyo, known as Lilo, lost in the accident. He was the most severely injured victim. suffering massive facial trauma, bleeding from his ear at the scene. This one single horrific detail really underscores the true devastating price of a systemic failure. So, who gets held accountable? Well, the liability here is spread across three very distinct layers. The driver, AI, he faces criminal charges for negligence and could get up to 5 years in prison. The contractor, the IASN, they're facing civil liability, which means they can be sued for financial damages. And finally, the government agency, the BGN, they face immense political and ethical pressure to completely overhaul the program to make sure this can never, ever happen again. And that brings us to our final question. The driver made a mistake, the contractor cut corners, the government's oversight was flawed. It's a chain of failure where every single link is connected. So when we look at a tragedy like this one, it forces us to ask, is it really enough to just punish the final person in the chain? Or does true justice demand that we hold the entire system accountable?